And welcome everyone. I am Elena Simpel. I'm a computer scientist based in London in the UK. In my free time, I am also an academic at the King's College in London. I'm going to do the first part of this webinar and then hand over to my colleague and friend, Oscar Corcho in Madrid. So the topic, as you have heard, looks at the relationship between data.europa.eu as a hugely visible data intermediary in the data ecosystem in Europe, and what we know as data spaces or common European data spaces, and how they've developed at the policy level across a number of different initiatives over the past years. So we're gonna first set the context, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the goal of the research that we've done, and the way we've done the research, and then hand over to my colleague for a summary of findings and conclusions and next steps. You may have heard about a huge development in European digital policy, which is the so-called European strategy for data. So this is the result of a huge amount of work done by the European Commission, by the member states, by various stakeholders, huge amounts of work and consultations to realize the strategy that, according to the Commission, focuses on putting people first in developing technology, with the awareness that such strategy is needed also to defend and promote European values and rights in the digital world. And data is a huge part of technology and technology development, and is an essential resource to promote growth, to make businesses more competitive, to foster innovation, job creation, and societal progress more broadly. And the aim really, ultimately, for the strategy is, as you perhaps can see in the screenshot, to create a so-called single market for data. To ensure that European businesses and organizations more broadly remain globally competitive. But at the same time, there are concerns there around preserving the sovereignty of data as well. Common European data spaces are mentioned in the last paragraph on this screenshot, and they are seen as a tool, as an instrument to ensure that more data becomes available for use in the economy and society, while keeping the companies and individuals who generate the data in control. And I've just seen a comment in the chat that people can't see the presentation.
I can do, so that's, I'm not sure.
I can see it clearly.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for confirming. A little bit more relaxed now. So we will also share the slides with you. I don't know, Oscar, if because you have this version of the slides, if there is a way to upload the local copy on Teams for people to download it as well.
Yeah, I will do in a minute. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you. Sorry, Michal, for this issue. Say we were talking about the European strategy of data for data, about the policy work at the European and national level, in all things technology, data being a key resource in this whole context, and then this idea of a data space as a means to share data that wouldn't be perhaps made available in the public domain for privacy reasons, for commercial sensitivity reason, but to be able to share this data in a trusted way, in a trusted environment with others, with the assumption that there will be certain types of steps and technologies, activities that would need to be carried out to make the data available for others, and that these sort of activities shouldn't be just a one-off, but should be operationalized and streamlined. In the context of the European Strategy for Data, so this is the same page that I'm referring to here, there are references to a number of key milestones in this work that has been going on for almost a decade. Regulation, there's references to regulation on European data governance that plays a role in ensuring that Europe remains not just globally competitive, but actually a thought leader at global scale with respect to the policies and instruments put in place to provide agency and control and sovereignty to data subjects and data institutions. In February this year, there's been a regulation that was proposed on harmonizing rules on how to access and use data, the so-called Data Act. And there's a number of additional things that the Data Act intends to realize across legislation, across measures to make data more widely available, particularly the so-called high-value publicly held data sets that are relevant across sectors and domains, and by making those or prioritizing those to be available in a useful way. There's expectation and there's evidence for that already in various sectors that could act as a booster for innovation, job creation, and growth, economical, societal, and otherwise. And the Data Act also makes reference to investments in the so-called European High Impact Project for developing infrastructure and tools and architectures and governance mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So that's the very broad context. European strategy for data, with data governance work, with the Data Act, and with data spaces as this tool, which can be a technical and IT tool, but also more broadly a framework to govern and share data in a trusted way. A data space is defined as a single market for data, and it can contain personal data, but also non-personal one. It could contain crucially sensitive data that wouldn't be made available otherwise in the public domain, that offers guarantees in terms of security so that businesses can trust sharing this data with confidence without losing any competitive advantage. In fact, they do that because they want to collaborate with other institutions or with government and to give their trusted partners easy access to useful, high quality data that has a number of mutual benefits. So this is how a data space is defined. Now, across the years, there have been various attempts to think about the sectors in which such data spaces at European level could and should be built. And this was an initial list that perhaps some of you have already seen, with these 8 sectors ranging from industry or manufacturing to environment, Green Deal, mobility, transport, health, finances, energy, agriculture, and skills. And these are actually very much aligned with activities that are going on at other levels across the European Union and within the European Commission, including relevant regulation in the space that has to do with the so-called European Open Science Cloud, which refers to a broad range of measures and initiatives to basically facilitate the sharing of scientific data sets, which can be in all of these domains and many others. And the technologies and the sort of challenges and concerns that apply to industrial data for common European data spaces are very much mirrored in the discussions and works that are going on in the science part of the Commission. Now, in this ecosystem, there's a number of initiatives, and we looked at 3 specifically in our research because of their European reach. The first one is the International Data Spaces Association. And this is a very useful, we found, infographic from their website that basically describes in a nutshell what they do. So the aim is for them to facilitate what they call trustworthy architectures for the data economy. And this happens in the form of agreeing on reference architectures. So on the abstract ways to develop data spaces. So the International Data Spaces Association doesn't actually create these sort of yes, Andrea, good comment. I'll move to the public administration data space in a short while. So the International Data Spaces Association is not a creator or a deployer, a host of data spaces per se, but it is providing crucial tools and the forum for different stakeholders and providers of such spaces or users of such spaces to come together and say, well, this is how one should build these data spaces. This is how one should think about them. This is how one should design them in technical terms, so that they offer certain types of guarantees, and also so that not every single consortium or organization that sets up a data space invents everything from scratch. Similar in aims is Gaia X, which according to the website is there to set up federated and secure data infrastructure. So many of the keywords are the same. Both of these initiatives are driven mostly by industry. That may mean technology providers, but it also means a whole range of businesses of different sizes, including SMEs and organizations that hold data and are interested in sharing it with government and with business partners. And the third big initiative that we looked at is a publicly funded project called Open Day, which is a coordination and support action. So this is a type of European project that supports the European Commission in implementing specific measures. So this is a coordination and support action that is looking specifically at data spaces and the business ecosystem around them, including digital platforms, pilots that are ongoing, and related standards, including standards developed by organizations such as IDSA and Gaia X, as well as the impact of these different tools on businesses. And they're looking specifically at 4 sectors: at manufacturing, at agriculture, energy, and healthcare. There's a number of things going on at the moment. So all this has been work that was going on within the Commission in different programs that the Commission is funding, and in activities, initiatives that are bootstrapped by different entities in Europe and beyond. So now these are things that are actually happening right now. So in the Digital Europe funding program, there are calls that are currently open that will support preparation work towards realizing these data spaces. Say, in terms of themes, we already see an iteration from that initial list to include topics like public procurement, to include languages, to include media, smart communities, security, and tourism, in response to evolving priorities. The deadlines for the first calls are already in the first half of 2022, so there is an expectation that towards the end of this year, we will see the first publicly funded programs that will start seriously preparing for some of these data spaces. And there's also plans to set up a so-called data space support center to support the community in cross-cutting concerns, similar to how the data sharing support center is operating right now. At the same time, there is awareness of the role of public sector open data. for technology, in particular AI-assisted technology. Thematically, this work builds directly on high-value data sets. So those were data sets in areas like geospatial and others that are publicly available, and where there are attempts to make these data sets available as a priority, as in a useful way for as many businesses as possible, and to increase the availability, quality, and usability of data to comply with the thoughts and recommendations from the Open Data Directive. So the premises for this report are twofold. First of all, against all this background, data.europa.eu is, we believe, a core instrument to supply European common data spaces with public sector data. In addition, complementing existing data sets that they will make available in a trusted network of data suppliers and users. The second premise for this report is that the projects that will be funded through those calls that I mentioned earlier will probably come up with more specific concerns in terms of the data that they will need. And those data sets will come from some of the participants in the data space, but to make the data as useful as possible, they would also have connections to data sets that are of general purpose. And open data is chiefly a tool to publish data in a way that it can be reused in as many contexts as possible. So based on these lists or catalogs that we would expect to see coming up of these initiatives that would be funded in the upcoming calls, sorry, it's just that my screen is now covered by some notifications. We would hopefully want to understand how the data that is presented in data.europa.eu could help, which data sets would become perhaps particularly relevant, and what we could do at our end to make sure that that data can be made as usefully available as possible. And finally, public administrations and other open data holders and publishers must be part of this conversation. So, as you will see in a second, a lot of the work that we have been doing is looking at different use cases that are currently being discussed as potential use cases for data spaces, and they involve some stakeholders more directly than others. Public administrations have invested heavily in capacity and expertise to release data openly. Many of the technical and non-technical challenges that are associated with putting data in the public domain will resonate with sharing data with a list of trusted business users or business partners. So now back to you. Before we move to the goals and research of the methodology, a few questions. Say, if you could perhaps type in the chat the degree to which you have heard about these initiatives like International Data Spaces Association and Gaia-X, and whether you are involved in any data space related initiative, and in which way. Say any, if no, also fine. Just write in the chat so that we get a sense of who is in the room and can perhaps tailor the content a little bit accordingly. Just a few minutes. Okay, so I already see there's a range of, excuse me, background. Some people are directly involved. Some people are hoping to learn more. Cultural heritage, some people who haven't heard about any of these initiatives, which is great. So I hope you find them useful and you find the webinar useful as an introduction. Lots of people involved in data spaces probably, so it would be very useful if we haven't interviewed you yet to tell us at any point in this webinar what you think about the conclusions we have drawn from this research and what you think the role of data.europa.eu should be in this context. And you can see here also some references from Georgia and others to other initiatives that we haven't mentioned. Very good. EOSC, quite a range of backgrounds today. Skills, a data utility company in Flanders. How interesting. And Flanders is doing some very interesting work also with Solid. London Data Store. I think I'm talking to someone from the London Data Store tomorrow morning. Precisely because I've heard about this data sharing work that is going on there. So looking forward to that. Okay, so it seems that we've reached now a point. Thank you so much. So I would encourage all of you to just scroll through the answers to just get a sense of the range of people in the room. Some really directly involved in the prep work that is going on at the moment in building some of these data spaces. Other interested in them for various reasons. Thank you very much. So now we move to the goals and research methodology we have followed. Say, following from the premises, open government data, in particular, open data portals and intermediaries like data.europa.eu shouldn't be an afterthought to the emerging European single market for data. And data.europa.eu is planning 2 pieces of research on this particular topic, and this is the first report. This report is super explorative, and that's to some degree due to the timing. Because when we planned and started the research, we would have expected that at this point, the works towards deploying some of these spaces would be slightly more advanced, but we are where we are. We nevertheless thought that this landscaping exercise and analysis of what is going on is perhaps useful to a wider community, because there are lots of things that are happening in parallel, and it is worth now at this early stage to explore challenges and opportunities for data.europa.eu in particular, to perhaps be able to act on some of the early conclusions. And there's going to be a second part, a second piece of research that we will do once some of the data spaces become available, to be able to deep dive into some of the challenges and opportunities. So in terms of methodology, we've done a huge piece, we think, of desk research followed by interviews. So in the desk research, we looked at data spaces that are planned or currently under implementation, but then because of the timing, as I was saying, we focused the analysis on available use cases for data spaces, and we looked specifically for references of open data, open government data, open data portals, data.europa.eu. We map up the different types of stakeholders involved according to a classification from the International Data Spaces Association. We looked at the degree to which these use cases and other resources mention public stakeholders, either as directly involved or relevant. And then we've also identified a number of key actors to reach out to for some in-depth interviews. So in terms of desk research, we looked at these 3 initiatives, which I have mentioned earlier. So if you go on the International Data Spaces Association use case website, apologies, they have a tool called Radar, which is very useful to have an understanding of what is happening. We've done this research a few months back when they had 57 published use cases published across a number of domains that you see here. Gaia X had 78 such use cases across a number of domains, not exactly the same, but to a large degree you can see some common themes around manufacturing, about smart cities and smart living, in the other case, energy, mobility, manufacturing plus automotive, or industry 4.0 as Gaia X calls it. Gaia X also published some more in-depth analysis of the use cases for each of the sectors, which we have also taken into account in our research. And then we looked at the work done by the Coordination and Support Action that looked at 34 projects across those 4 sectors that I have mentioned earlier. Excuse me. So for the research methods themselves, so we looked at each individual use case. We looked at the white papers for Gaia X and at those 34 projects and the analysis that the CSA has done. And we checked to which extent open data and portals and data intermediaries like data.europa.eu are mentioned there, and the involved degree to which public sector administrations as publishers and maintainers of portals are a concern. We've discarded all spaces that were either focusing too much on a piece of tech like a data platform, or that were very much inward looking, so an enterprise data space where the sharing was mostly around business units within the same organization rather than between organizations. And we've reached out to 19 people from this ecosystem, which we have identified during desk research, and 12 of them luckily responded from 8 different countries. And we ran some 30 minutes interviews with them, which you can't really read on the slide, but there's an appendix in the report with all the questions we have asked them. And now, before I lose my voice altogether, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Oscar, who will tell you something about the findings. Thank you so far.
Thanks a lot, Elena. I mean, thanks for this very nice introduction that I think that, I mean, many of you have declared that you have been working on data spaces. So probably, I mean, you were already knowing quite a lot from the European Strategy for Data, from all the data spaces initiatives, and I mean, these things that we have been considering in our research. But also there were others, many others that said that I mean, you were just starting, and I think that this introduction has been very useful for that purpose. I see also in the chat right now from Johan that there is, I mean, a link to a quite interesting reading. In fact, this is a report that was produced or published in February this year. It is included as one of the references in the report. So, I mean, I think that it will be quite relevant in order to understand where we are in terms of the implementation, the current status of all these common European data spaces. Yeah. So let's now go. I mean, I will share my screen if you wish, Elena, so that it is easier for you to really, yeah, like go ahead. Yeah. So we will now go into an analysis of the main findings, yeah, that we obtained following the methodology that Elena was pointing out. And in fact, I mean, we could start with this table that is in the report. I mean, you can just check all the details in the report, especially in an annex where we are giving much more details on all the analysis that we were doing. I think that one important aspect that we have to consider in the research that we have done, as you have seen, is that as there were only initial versions, ideas from the common European data spaces that we hope that will be developing in the following months, years. We had to concentrate on those ones that were already available, reported from all these initiatives. So what we have over here is like a large amount of initiatives, around 150, as you can see from here. And we were trying to see whether the open data sector, the public data movements and initiatives were actually well represented in those ones. Yeah. Our surprise over here was really that not too many of them are actually declaring that they are using open data. This is what they declare explicitly. This does not mean that some of them may be using open data without actually explicitly declaring it in the context of the use cases or internally. I mean, but we are just taking the descriptions as part of our desk research. Only 2 of them, I mean, from these 150 mentioned at some point in time data.europa.eu, and a few of them, and this was probably the most surprising case for us or finding for us, was that those ones that were involving public stakeholders. And I think that that's quite relevant in order for us, I mean, to pay attention to the fact that if we really want to have rich data spaces that cover all those aspects that we are considering in the original definition, and I mean in the main aims of data spaces, on actually having this data sharing, not only across industries, but also with the public sector, with persons, and so on. We really have to make sure that we position public services, I mean, public stakeholders also in them, yeah? I mean, from these numbers, I mean, that you can see in the report, and then you can go into the specific analysis. Probably some of the most important pieces or aspects to be considered is that in the area of mobility, as we see, there are initiatives that are involving public stakeholders, okay, and they are involving open data. Also in the area of smart living, smart cities, it is quite common to have some cities, regions associated to these initiatives. But there are many others where you will see a 0 in the 3rd column, yeah? And that's those are the ones where, I mean, we should really think about whether there is opportunities for the public stakeholders to enter, or whether we are missing, yeah, the public stakeholders, and they should be included. They should be a little bit more pushing, yeah, into entering into those ones. We also, I mean, like, have as one of the additional findings, we knew this when we were doing the desk research, that we were going to find this, that still there is not, I mean, like a complete agreement on the lists of data spaces that we are going to be working on the domains that are going to be dealt with. On the right over here, you can see the domains on data spaces that are identified by these initiatives, GaiaX, IDSA, or OpenDay. And on the left, we can see the European Common Data Spaces, a little bit more expanded. And I mean, as it was pointed out already, the full list is in page 6 of the report. It contains obviously the public administration ones, and over here we have expanded them. So what you can see, I mean, those in blue is where there is some relationship. I mean, there is some match that we can have, like Green Deal with the geoinformation case, because they are very related and intertwined. Smart communities with the smart living and cities, or the other ones like the health ones that are also, I mean, being discussed as part of the European Common Data Spaces. But there are others that do not appear across these initiatives, GaiaX, and OpenDay. And it should be also important to understand why they are not being considered relevant from these initiatives that are developing reference architectures and technology components, and whether we should pay attention also to try to make sure that they are identified over there, because they could bring interesting pointers to, I mean, things that have to be considered in the reference architectures. For instance, I'm thinking on the media data space or the language data space that will have clear, I mean, requirements, yeah, that will be needed from a technology and architectural point of view. Some of the additional general findings that we have, and then we will move into sector-specific ones, is that, I mean, as we could expect, knowing, I mean, like also where the Gaia-X initiatives and its initiatives were starting from, there is a little bit of a bias, yeah, in terms of French, German organizations in the descriptions of the use cases. This is not bad at all. I mean, it reflects a little bit, well, where the main push for some of these initiatives started from. But this also tells us that, I mean, there would be a need to try to make sure that other geographical areas are also represented in these catalogs that are being created and where many people are going and checking, yeah? There are clearly these three sectors, geographical, mobility, smart cities, that have very clear ties to open data sources. The actual open data portals are not really mentioned. I mean, as we have said, data.europa.eu is really like scarcely mentioned in many of them, and public stakeholders are not so much mentioned or involved. And I think that this is also important to consider. And finally, I mean, there is no discussion yet, very clear discussion at least, on the catalogs of data sets that are being used in each of these initiatives. I think that we are at early stages, but I think that this is also important in order to consider the value that the catalogs of data sets that many of you are involved in, and especially data.europa.eu is involved in, how they should be present also over here. When we move into sector-specific findings, and you have again more details on the report, we can see that in agriculture there is a lot of Earth observation data, and there is a lot of discussion on Inspire. So I mean, we could somehow say, okay, the public sector is partially involved, yeah. However, I mean, there is not a clear involvement of stakeholders. So I think that, I mean, this is something relevant to consider. At least they are not clearly mentioned. In terms of energy, there are some municipal open data being used, especially at the local level. I mean, in relation to some of the use cases that are around business models in energy related to cities. There are some cases of national agencies, but I mean, they are, again, very limited. In the context of finance, we can see also the opportunity for several public administrations to be stakeholders, and some of them are appearing there. We have something similar on geoinformation. And in the case of health, most of the cases were very related to COVID-19. Probably, I mean, we are a little bit biased on that with the use cases that we have, but I mean, it also shows that there are nice opportunities for data sharing, yeah? And I know, I mean, from some of the participants today, that they're having people working on this from the public sector, providing very nice use cases in this context, yeah? I think that, I mean, I will mostly concentrate on the ones that are involved over here. But starting from manufacturing, this was something that we were expecting, probably, that there was not much in terms of open data references over here, or public sector organizations involved. Probably, I mean, this is something common, considering also the source or where many of these initiatives are coming in. But again, I mean, this may open the possibility of why not considering some open data sources as well, especially for supply chain or logistics, because, I mean, they may be relevant. And then we move into those ones where we said there is a little bit more presence: mobility, public sector, obviously, and smart cities. The most striking finding that we had was on those cases related to the public sector. When there were initiatives and that were identified as emerging data spaces in the public sector, many of them were talking about cities, many of them were talking about regions. None of them was considering the involvement of public stakeholders. And this is striking. I mean, this is really something that we really have to reconsider, and we really have to see what's going on. I mean, why there is this clear mismatch on those specific cases. Take into account that we are not talking about the procurement data space, we are not talking about the skills data space, we are not talking about some of those data spaces that are clearly identified in the common European data spaces as those ones that would be from the public, because they are coming again from the initiatives that are registered in the portals, in the places from these three overarching umbrella initiatives, yeah? Gaia-X, it's an open day, yeah? So That said, I mean, these are some of these sector-specific findings coming from this research. As Elena has commented, we also ran several interviews with people who are involved in the development of either from the technical point of view or from the sector-specific point of view on the development of some of these initiatives. Yeah, and we thought, I mean, that we managed to get a very nice combination of backgrounds and specialties. And I mean, from these interview findings, basically, we were able to really like construct the recommendations that will come in the end, the final conclusions that come in the end. And also in the report, we wanted to highlight some specific statements that were done by some of these ones, yeah, and that we have already commented a little bit. First of all, that I mean, like it was kind of a common agreement that the public sector organizations are generally underrepresented still for the time being, especially in all those bottom-up initiatives that we have seen, yeah? And even though the role of open data portals as data providers, data.europa.eu as an intermediary is taken for granted in many of them, we consider, I mean, and this was coming from not just from one of the interviewees, but from several, that they should be more actively involved in the development. Yeah, and I think that that's quite an important point and quite an important conclusion for us. The second one is related to the fact that, I mean, like open data portals and intermediaries are well known for having demonstrated, yeah, that it is possible to federate metadata across different administrations and levels, and providing links to all these data sets. And in fact, I mean, this type of technology could be a very nice component for the data spaces. I know, I mean, from my involvement, my personal involvement in some of the data spaces, that this is always considered as a pointer, as something to start from. But there are also technical developments that are being done that probably are not considering exactly all the approaches that have been taken into account in the context of open data portals and all the federation mechanisms. So again, there is over here an opportunity to get a little bit more involved and show the goods, the pros of what has been done already in the open data space. And finally, there were, I mean, we wanted to also highlight some comments related to the potential position that the public administrations, public organizations could have as neutral organizations that may provide some of the specific support for some of the specific roles. I mean, from all these set of roles that Elena was commenting that are defined, for instance, by the Industrial Data Space Association, the International Data Space Association, sorry. So, for instance, roles as vocabulary providers, yeah, which is something that is already being done from many of the public organizations, yeah, many of you who are listening today to this webinar. Also on the development or promoting the development of data standards and models as identity providers as well. Somebody was asking about the interoperability efforts that are being done and whether we were considering them. As I said, I mean, this is not part of this report, a specific part of this report or webinar, but in any case, I mean, I think that there are some aspects that may be relevant to consider. And again, I mean, this could position or this would have the opportunity to position public sector organizations as well in this space. So these were just some findings, some things that we highlighted from the interviews that we had. You have these ones in the report, apart from some other additional findings. And we wanted to move now into the conclusions, yeah. And I mean, we are going to be probably repeating a little bit more, a little bit on this part of the conclusions. I think that, I mean, we think after this analysis that, yeah, clearly data spaces are an emerging field. There are plenty of activities that are running, I mean, like at the European level, at the national levels, even at regional levels. I mean, many people are very active in this context of data spaces. But there is still some biases, limitations that we could identify in whatever it is available on the web currently. I mean, when we go into catalogs of use cases and initiatives, and also in terms of the stakeholders and how they are represented. We think that I mean, like we have seen that the open government data sources, the portals, the stakeholders are not very well represented yet. And I mean, I think that they can play a key role in many of these data spaces. So we should make an effort to make this presence more visible. And obviously, the initiatives that are currently being presented, because of where they are coming from, the provenance, they are not showing very clearly those ones, those common data spaces that are coming from the public sector. So we will have to make sure that there are clear catalogs where one can go and check what is going on in terms of the public sector data spaces or public sector-led data spaces. Because if not, I mean, we run the risk that people will not consider the public sector over there. There are opportunities, yeah, that we shouldn't miss, yeah. Open data score is a core type of data source that should be used in data spaces, so we should make sure that this appears more prominently. All the experience that has been gathered in the open data initiatives in all the processes in the life cycle of open data, publishing, data quality analysis, discovery, federation, and so on, is key and should be transferred to data spaces if possible. I think that, I mean, this is an opportunity for getting quite a lot of impact in that sense. And finally, interoperability. It will require neutral entities, yeah, and probably there is also a potential role that public entities may have over here. So Elena has been commenting that this is just one of two reports, yeah. Our next steps will be to wait a little bit. I mean, we have this staff working document that was commented in the chat before, which is related to what is the ongoing development on the common European data spaces. There are all these projects, most of them funded by Digital Europe, that are starting setting the scene, yeah, for the development of the data spaces for the implementation phase that will start by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So once that this is starting to be a little bit more developed, we will go into an in-depth case study analysis, focusing mostly on the role that data.europa.eu is having and will have. And from here, we will be also deriving technical, non-technical roadmaps so that all the background that we have from data.europa.eu and all the open data portals initiatives, all the open data initiatives can be more prominently used in data spaces. So these are our next steps. These are the conclusions. I think that, I mean, as in every webinar, you can use this for providing some feedback on the seminar. And we are now, I mean, I will keep it over here, and we are now ready for a brief question and answer session on the remaining 7-8 minutes, yeah, that we have. Thanks. By the way, I have not been checking the chat while I was presenting, so probably there will be interesting things. I'm not sure, Elena, if you or Julia, if you have been checking then, or if not, I mean, like the floor is yours. I mean, if anybody wants to.
So let me just quickly scroll through the chat. So maybe we just start with the last question that that just came in now. I assume that you would actually answer the question what the role of data.europa.eu is, can be, should be in the context of data spaces. I didn't hear this answer, or it got lost in the rest of the information. Can you please answer the question? Wow, say right. Yeah, just say it how it is. Oscar, do you want to start?
I can do.
I could try to be very blunt.
Yeah. So very basically, I think that I mean, like the analysis that was a little bit surprising for us was that data.europa.eu was not being discussed or referenced mostly in any of the use cases that were presented, mostly in any of the position papers that we could read. Obviously, there is a bias on which are the sources that we were using. But considering what is the role, yeah, that data.europa.eu should have, the first answer that I would have is it should be there. Yeah, I mean, it should make sure that it is there. If not, we run the risk, we may run the risk that the concept of data spaces is going to be only discussed when we are talking about the public procurement data space. That's quite nice, yeah, because it's very public led. I mean, it will start with all the work that has been done in TED and in some national procurement data platforms, yeah. However, or it will be the same with the legal, the legal one, yeah. But there are many other spaces where the open data providers have something to say, both from the content point of view. I assume that, I mean, from the content point of view, this is going to be taken, yeah, because whatever open data is available there, it will be taken, it will be reused. But also, even from the technology point of view, understanding that these initiatives are going to be developing technology components, and reference architectures, but there are plenty of things, plenty of elements that have been done in the past and that have been led by national data portals and by data.europa.eu that may not be considered or may seem to be created from scratch when they have been already well tested in the context of these initiatives. Yeah. So my blunt, I mean, it would be a question, a call to just really like be more proactive, be more present in all the data space discussions that are happening right now. If not, we may lose like the value or the impact that the open data initiatives have been showing in these last a bit more than 10 years. Mm-hmm. That would be my take on this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to add to that, say we've analyzed 150 use cases, right? Say maybe not all of them will need any type of open data, but our expectation was that 80% of these data space use cases will make use of a data set that is indexed by data.europa.eu. And the fact that they don't know this either means that data.europa.eu works so well as a tool for data discovery that it is taken for granted, because people also don't mention that they're going to use search engine to look for documents to do their desk research. But actually what is probably mean is what Oscar said, that open data stakeholders are not part of that conversation in the way that they should. And that needs to change. And then there's a piece around technology transfer, which I think is actually, I think there's a lot of organizations involved in international data space associations and others that have some of that expertise, especially on the technology side. But I think there, that role of a data intermediary as a creator and facilitator of interoperability standards alongside CMIC and others can be quite crucial. And there's a third aspect to this, which is really that lots of these data spaces will operate at different levels. So beyond the common European data spaces one, there will be regional, there will be national data spaces, and data.europa.eu has built these relationships with open government data providers at all levels in so many countries. So even facilitating those introductions to the actual data publishers and making sure that technologies and knowledge exchange do happen across the network would be quite important as well.
Yeah. There is a comment as well on from Max Deckers related to data.ap. This is yet another example. So data.ap could be quite clearly one of the obvious solutions to start using for the metadata, yeah, for the description of metadata in the context of data spaces. And I mean, one could think, yeah, this is going to be taken and probably extended a little bit just to cover some of the specific needs, yeah, that we may need in this business to business interaction, business to government, and so on, yeah. However, I mean, we must say that in some cases, there are some information models that are being proposed in some of these initiatives that are somehow mimicking data.ap, but are not necessarily discussing it or using it, which is again a risk, yeah, because then all our metadata models may become I wouldn't say unusable, but then we would have the need to have open data portals providing also another metadata model in order to be able to interact with data spaces. Yeah. And that would be a risk. Yeah, Max.
And this is very much along the lines of the last question that Georgia is asking around whether we investigated whether there are cross interactions among data spaces with the risk that these spaces become silos, which is related to what you just said. So the answer to that is no. It wasn't really in the focus of this first study. We really just wanted to know, okay, what is the current status regarding data.europa.eu and the potential relationships. But we didn't look at spaces themselves. So there could be a piece around, if we expand more on what the knowledge and the technology transfer could look like from the open data community towards data spaces, then that would be actually a big part of the pitch. Perhaps a final question, and then we wrap up, from Andrea. Wonder whether in your study you looked also at whether how data catalogs need to integrate new features in order to address requirements of data spaces. And I'm taking this on because that's one of the things that we would want to do in the second report for specific data space implementations. So the plan is to look at how they're implemented, to see where the reference architectures are at that point in time, and then come up with exactly that.
Okay, I think that there are some more questions probably. I mean, we can later on, I mean, just feel free to send them. I mean, I see one from Martin on the open data portals on the mobility sector, which is a special one as well. Although, I mean, now there is I mean, there is an overlap between open data portals and the ones that are coming on the mobility side, on the national access points. I think that, I mean, like, if you want, I mean, you can just send them to us by email, and we can probably, I mean, like, have a conversation on this. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy to see quite a lot of attendance today on this, and I mean, like, a lot of interest, yeah, on this topic. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Good. Should we close? Yeah. And,
Okay. Then the report is available on the website. We've also added a link in the chat, but I appreciate there's been lots of interaction on the chat, which is great as well. So thank you, and stay tuned for the second report.